Plaster rained down like ash as the gunshot fractured the cabin's study. The pistol clattered away, torn from its wielder's grasp by the crushing force of a black wolf's jaws. The man screamed, his wrist reduced to splintered bone, his breath sharp with terror. Books cascaded from shelves, journals scattering across the floor like startled birds. In the center of the chaos, the wolf stood motionless, fur bristling, eyes lit with glacial fire. It was no pet, no hybrid mistake of nature, but a predator pure and unyielding. The cabin, once a sanctuary of learning, had shifted into a hunting ground. Men who had entered with certainty now felt the ancient truth of trespass. What they faced was not a dog defending its master. It was wilderness incarnate, drawn into timber walls, claiming the house as den and the intruders as prey. The copper line parted with a muted click, dropping into pine needles like a lifeline severed. The cabin above went dark, its single light extinguished by hands that mistook silence for control. Yet deeper silence already existed, one born of breath slowed and paws cushioned against snow. The black wolf had shadowed them since they crested the ridge, tracking scents of gun oil, nicotine, and greed. In their arrogance, the men thought they erased evidence by cutting wires, but every molecule of sweat clung to them like a beacon. Every shift of fabric rasped against the forest's ear. The intruders belonged to a world of tools and shortcuts. The wolf belonged to one of patience and inevitability. They crept toward walls believing themselves hunters. The mistake was not the break-in, but the assumption that this den was empty. The forest knew its sentinel, and tonight he waited inside.
2 winters earlier, mountains swallowed a small aircraft whole. Storm winds tore it apart mid-sky, scattering metal and ash into ravines. Inside the cabin, the survivors were not human. A teenage girl inherited silence, and a black wolf inherited a role. He had already endured a steel trap as a pup. Captivity had bitten and failed. He knew pain, he knew release, and he knew that bonds formed from survival weigh heavier than bloodlines. The girl mourned with tears, but the wolf marked territory. For her, the cabin was loss. For him, it became den. The hearth, the books, the scents layered over years, all entered his circle of guardianship. Humans had left this world fractured. Wolves do not grieve in such ways. They endure, adapt, and claim. When the intruders came later, they stepped not into her home, but into his range. Uniforms had visited days before, their weapons holstered, but their words sharper than steel. They called the wolf dangerous, a liability that must one day be caged or destroyed. Their scent was authority and fear, a mixture the forest never respects. The girl had signed documents with shaking hand, tethering legality to hope. The wolf had stood silent, eyes fixed, absorbing the tension without understanding the symbols, but recognizing the tone. To men of rules, he was a statistic waiting for paperwork. To the wilderness, he was law itself. Bureaucracy could cut deeper than blades, but wolves learn patience as easily as violence. That day, he did not lunge. He memorized. When the time came, threats would no longer wear uniforms and badges. They would come in the dark with cutters and crowbars. And he would answer them in the only language the wild allows.
Inside the cabin, wood betrayed the intruders with faint cries. Each step exhaled their weight into the air. One voice rasped with age and control. Another trembled with youth disguised as bravado. The black wolf was already waiting, framed in shadow, body aligned with the doorway like a gate forged of flesh and instinct. His ears rotated to track their whispers, cataloging tones of greed and hesitation. No growl escaped him. Predators reveal nothing until the strike. The girl's heart raced beside him, but her pulse was background noise to the wolf's focus. The stairway delivered prey upward, into his reach.
They thought stealth was theirs. It was merely permission granted until teeth demanded otherwise. Each board groaned louder, each breath carried farther. At the top, they would find not the frightened child they expected, but the embodiment of winter sharpened into a hunter's form. Seasons had trained the wolf in lessons harsher than any handler's leash. Snowdrifts taught patience, starvation honed judgment, and storms instructed endurance. The cabin became extension of his range, its walls scent-marked by years of patrols. To the girl, it was study and survival. To him, it was den, inviolate and absolute. His muscles were rope-drawn taut, honed by hunts through timber where elk thunder and coyotes scatter. Yet this night required not pursuit, but defense. Territory is blood's first command. He had already mapped the house in silence. Exits, weak points, angles where moonlight betrayed movement. The men believed themselves unseen, but wolves calculate differently. They know how wind carries sweat. They know how tension travels through footsteps. Every lesson learned in winters past gathered into his chest now. What had once been instinct became verdict, and trespass demanded teeth. The sharp cry of shattering glass tore through the cabin's frame, the first true declaration of invasion. Cold air rushed inside, bringing foreign scents that clawed at the wolf's nostrils. Territory had been breached. His body lowered, weight balanced, paws silent against the wooden floor. Men slipped through the window with movements loud to ears attuned to leaves and snow. They smelled of hunger, not for food, but for wealth imagined. Wolves know hunger differently. His was a need for order, for boundaries respected. The girl darkened the room, hiding herself, but the wolf did not hide. His presence grew sharper in the shadows, eyes glinting faint blue as moonlight brushed them. He was not pet, not anomaly. He was Black Wolf, sovereign of his range, and now his den had been entered. Every trespass carries cost. The intruders had chosen to pay with flesh. Nature issues commands without words, and the Black Wolf had memorized them long before men cut lines and shattered windows. Do not warn unless warning grants advantage. Do not fight unless territory demands it. Strike once, strike true, then vanish or dominate. His muscles wrote those rules into silence. The intruders moved as if houses obey human law. But this cabin no longer belonged to their kind. It obeyed the wilderness that lived within its walls, a set of rules sharper than statutes. The wolf aligned himself at thresholds where men must pass, positions chosen not for show, but for efficiency. Every twitch of ear, every adjustment of paw was calculation. The girl's presence was absorbed into his pattern, not partner, not master, but pack. Men believed in safes and inheritance. Wolves believe in survival. And tonight, survival had sharpened itself into perfect readiness. The door gave way under force, light beams lancing into the bedroom. Two men froze mid-stride as their eyes locked on the impossible shape. Not a dog, too massive, too composed. Not wild either. Its stillness carried intent. The older intruder steadied the younger, both understanding in different ways that the balance of the night had shifted. Wolves recognize predators, men recognize judgment. In the space between those recognitions, silence ruled. The wolf stood unblinking, a silhouette of midnight muscle, not charging, not yielding, but claiming. The intruders had expected compliance. Instead, they faced calculation. Books and photographs on the walls spoke of research and science, but standing in the room was something beyond study, wilderness distilled into living form. Neither man spoke. Their beams shook across fur that seemed to drink the light. They had found what they could neither buy nor kill easily. The search began, a violation disguised as method. Drawers ripped open, journals kicked aside, family photographs overturned. Flashlights interrogated shelves, probing corners for imagined treasure. Yet beneath their noise, another presence ruled the space. The wolf shadowed their every move, slipping from frame to frame, unseen until he chose visibility. The intruders mistook her silence for fear. They did not realize her protector had already cataloged them, scent, gait, breathing rhythm, every detail stored for the strike. The house shifted under their touch, changing from home into wilderness, each overturned object another marker of trespass. What the men saw as possessions were to the wolf signals of pack identity. Their destruction meant challenge, and wolves do not debate when challenged. They wait, measure, and unleash. The cabin did not resist them because resistance stood embodied, fur bristling, breath steaming, eyes burning with patient inevitability.
Frustration grew as cabinets opened to nothing but dust. Drawers offered trinkets of no market value, and journals spoke of science instead of cash. The younger intruder kicked papers, spitting curses at absent wealth. The elder remained calculating, his eyes narrowing with each failure. Yet, they missed the deeper wealth. The wolf's patience, measured like ice building pressure beneath a frozen river. His silence filled the house, sharper than threats. He moved where light could not touch, a shadow with eyes alive. Each object rifled was a trespass, each stomped book a warning ignored. Men searched for fortune in boxes and frames, failing to recognize that they had already found it. But some fortunes do not enrich, they consume. In every overturned drawer, in every cracked photograph glass, they dug deeper into a debt they could never repay. The elder's hand paused on trim disguised as carpentry. Wood flexed beneath pressure, revealing the faintest shift, a hidden panel unnoticed for years. The wolf stiffened, breath slowing, as if time itself braced for rupture. Intruders believed they unearthed secrets through cleverness, but the den had never belonged to them. What they uncovered was not treasure, but provocation. In the wilderness, to breach a hidden cache is to steal marrow from the bone. The wolf's muscles rippled under black fur, his body language tightening to violence. He knew no concept of inheritance, no trust funds, no insurance. He knew possession. This was den. These were objects layered with pack scent. The panel's click was louder than thunder to the silence that followed. Trespass had escalated. The line between violation and confrontation had thinned to a single heartbeat. And the wolf waited for it to snap.
Far from timber walls, future chambers glowed sterile. White tiles reflected harsh light. Chairs squeaked beneath officials who smelled of ink and doubt. Shadow would one day stand there, eyes unreadable beneath flickering bulbs, examined by men who wrote laws but knew little of wilderness. They would measure his existence in reports, evaluating worth and danger through glass. Yet their words would be pale compared to what had already been written in blood and silence. In those rooms, Emma's voice would carry weight, steady and unbroken, testifying that survival had worn fur and breathed frost. But that was later. For now, the wolf's destiny brewed in a cabin's shadows, while distant bureaucrats prepared their pens. The wilderness was about to demand entry into their halls, not by choice, but by inevitability. Some creatures are not judged by documents. They are judged by nights such as this. Outside, a glow pierced through forest blackness, headlights climbing gravel switchbacks, slow and deliberate. The intruders froze at windows, uncertain if rescue or reckoning approached. For the wolf, it was neither. Light through trees was signal, a reminder that more variables pressed inward. Territory had grown crowded. He tracked beams as they slid across trunks, painting ghostly patterns onto bark. His ears caught the grind of tires, the cough of an engine laboring uphill. The men panicked, breath sharp, voices cracking in whispers. But the wolf measured calmly. Distraction weakens prey. The cabin no longer contained just intruders and defenders. It had become a crossroads where outsiders converged. The headlights would bring escalation, not escape. And in the overlap of panic and hesitation, the predator's advantage sharpened further. Light was never safety. It was exposure.
A gun pressed to the girl's head drew silence so taut it sang. The elder intruder's voice sharpened to a hiss, demanding knowledge she could not provide. His calculation was cruel but efficient. Hostage, compliance, escape. Yet predators also calculate. The wolf's body lowered, his stare unbroken, reading angles of flesh and steel. He did not lunge. Wolves understand patience, even when fire presses against skin. The room thickened with competing mathematics, human numbers of threats and leverage, animal equations of distance and strike velocity. Breath clouded the air, sweat salted it further. Men believed they controlled variables, but they miscalculated. They counted the girl as asset, the wolf as risk. They failed to count the inevitability of instinct. In wilderness arithmetic, hesitation is subtraction, patience is multiplication, and violence, once chosen, is always absolute. It began with silence, then ruptured in motion too swift for comprehension. The wolf launched not at the man holding the gun, but at the weaker link, the younger intruder nearest the window. 120 pounds of predator collided with chest, cracking ribs, tearing flesh and streaks of blood. A scream tore open the cabin, bookshelves collapsing under the impact. The weapon clattered from his grip, lost beneath the desk. In 3 heartbeats, the balance inverted. Fear radiated like heat from human skin. The elder swung his weapon, torn between target and survival. The wolf did not pursue further. He withdrew instantly, command in his instincts. Strike, disarm, retreat to control. The cabin's silence returned, but it carried a new timbre, one heavy with panic and awe. Violence had spoken once, and its echo promised more.
The cabin's frame shuddered as the front door burst inward. Old timber splintered under unexpected force. A man stepped through, older, weathered, bearing the weight of decades and the poise of training. His voice carried the resonance of command, filling the space where fear had reigned. For the wolf, this was a shift in scent and tone. Not intruder, but neighbor. Known, tolerated, part of the extended range. The elder human intruder faltered, caught between prey and new rival. Shadows swirled around the wolf, his presence magnified by chaos. In a single breath, the hierarchy shifted again. Not only the trespassers in the den remained. Another hunter had entered, one not of fang, but of steel and discipline. The collision of worlds intensified. The wolf stood in the center, anchor between wilderness and civilization, waiting for the next decision to break. Far beyond the cabin, sirens echoed, rising like a storm tide. Blue and red lights flickered against pine trunks, each flash a warning of civilization encroaching. The intruders felt only panic. The wolf felt only tightening of space. More humans meant more unpredictability. Territory shrank with every wail of sirens. He pressed closer to the girl, body coiled not in fear, but readiness. This was not rescue. This was intrusion by another name.
Authority brought pens, papers, tranquilizers. Dangers less immediate than guns, but more enduring. The forest outside seemed to recoil, its silence broken by mechanical screams. In the wolf's world, survival meant balance. Tonight, balance fractured under sirens. The cabin's battle was no longer private. The wilderness had been lit in flashing colors, and men who misunderstood predators were closing in faster than resolution could form.
Within chaos, objects shifted. Books lay trampled, heirlooms pocketed, photographs smeared with blood. Every displaced item was evidence, though none of the intruders understood it. Even officials, when they arrived, would see possessions first, not the predator's law beneath them. The wolf circled silently, his gaze pinning every motion. To him, the scene was not theft or vandalism. It was desecration, the den torn apart, memory disrupted, scent layers disturbed. He cataloged intruders not only by body, but by the destruction they left. Each broken frame, each overturned page became another marker of violation. Humans measured guilt in papers and testimony. Wolves measured it in scent and disruption. The wolf would not forget. He would remember the trail each invader left behind, and memory to a predator is not passive. It is a ledger balanced only with blood or departure. Later, in a hospital ward reeking of antiseptic and fear, the elder intruder would wake screaming. Shackled wrists bore scars not only of teeth, but of something deeper. In dreams, he relived blue fire eyes, jaws clamping with inevitability, the breath of wilderness colder than any night he had known. Nurses whispered of trauma, of combat flashbacks, of madness. But what haunted him was not war, it was the wolf. Pure, black, unyielding. A predator had looked into him and judged him lacking. No cell, no treatment, no court could erase the memory. In his sleep, he smelled pine resin, heard stairs groan, felt the hot pressure of blood and fur. He had faced something older than his violence, something incorruptible by money or law. For all his crimes, his greatest punishment was simple: survival with memory of the black wolf's verdict.
Miles from the cabin, under neon buzz and the smell of stale coffee, another name surfaced: Billy Chen, the man who sold false promises of hidden wealth. His words sent predators of a different breed toward the cabin. Deals were whispered over sugar packets and cigarettes, but none of it belonged to the wolf's world. Still, the consequences drifted back to his range like pollution in a stream. Men's debts, their betrayals, their hunger for money, all carved paths that ended in the forest. And when they stepped across that line, it was not laws or debts that answered. It was teeth. The diner's chatter, the flick of spoons against mugs, meant nothing to the black wolf. Yet in ways unseen, this conversation tethered new danger to his den, threads of greed weaving tighter around his silence. At dawn, the forest carried evidence. Boot prints cut deep into frost, heavy with panic and retreat. Yet some tracks ended abruptly, vanishing where snow should have captured them. The wolf followed, paws pressing silent patterns alongside human chaos. He found objects left behind: a lens cap, thermal residue, signs of watching eyes beyond the intruders themselves. More had come. More would return. Territory boundaries shifted outward, no longer just the cabin but ridges and shadows beyond. The wolf marked, cataloged, adjusted. His world was no longer solitude with a girl in her hearth. It had become contested ground, stalked by debts owed far away. Men left behind confusion, but predators no clarity. The tracks did not vanish. They paused, they waited, and so did the wolf, expanding vigilance into the tree line, where the unseen prepared their next intrusion.
In sterile halls, with clipboards and hushed debates,
Men in coats measured the wolf with their metrics. Stress tests, mazes, controlled encounters. They sought to classify instinct in tidy reports. Yet even here he refused to break pattern. No unprovoked violence, no reckless charge. Instead, calm precision. He chose stillness when chaos could have erupted, silence when noise was demanded. Observers scribbled, confused. Was he pet? Was he predator? Their categories blurred. To the wolf, it was simple. No threat, no strike. Humans mistook discipline for taming, but wilderness had not been erased, it had been honed. Each measured breath reminded them that some risks cannot be erased by paperwork. They can only be endured. In the end, their pens could not contain him. They recorded numbers, but the true language of risk had already been written in blood-streaked cabin walls. In a county boardroom smelling of coffee and dust, men and women cast votes. Papers shifted, gavels struck. Language redefined the wolf from threat to companion. Therapeutic? They labeled him, as if vocabulary could domesticate fangs. The girl wept quietly in relief, her hand resting on fur that had carried her through fire. Yet the wolf remained indifferent. Wolves do not celebrate rulings. They recognize only survival. Still, survival now carried structure, a fragile protection against tranquilizers and rifles. The board's decision was not mercy, but concession, forced by testimony and truth. The black wolf would remain. He would patrol his den, guard his pack, watch the trees for return of debt-ridden predators. Bureaucracy had spoken, but its power was illusion. Real authority remained in the forest, written in tracks and scents, and there the wolf's verdict stood unquestioned.
Prison walls could not silence guilt. A letter arrived, written by the elder intruder whose wrist bore scars of bone-deep justice. His words confessed nothing clean, but spoke of awakening. He claimed the wolf's stare had stripped him bare, that his violence shrank before a predator that needed no cruelty to command fear. The money he stole was redirected to foundations, gestures of penance scratched in ink. Yet the wolf did not read. He did not forgive. Forgiveness is a human concept, fragile and conditional. Predators neither condemn nor absolve. They act, and then they move on. The girl folded the paper with shaking hands, her emotions tangled. But the wolf remained steady. His memory was not swayed by apologies. For him, the letter was irrelevant. What mattered was that the man would never again step across his range. On land scarred by intrusion, construction began anew. Fences extended, enclosures widened, streams redirected to carve sanctuary from ruin. The wolf roamed the expanded borders, his territory reinforced by human effort. But this was no prison. Gates stood open, boundaries porous. The forest still accepted him, and he accepted both worlds. A foundation was named, a legacy to the girl's parents, but it was the wolf who patrolled its edges, who made survival more than paperwork. Visitors came, children with eyes too old for their years, soldiers carrying invisible wounds. They stepped hesitantly, then found calm in his silent presence. No speeches, no ceremonies, only the rhythm of breath, the weight of stillness, the reassurance of eyes that promised unbroken watch. This was the true foundation, a black wolf standing sentinel, ensuring that pain became protection, that survival transformed into legacy. The program expanded. Children once bitten by dogs reached trembling hands toward fur, expecting pain, but finding only calm. Veterans sat in silence. broken rhythms of breath easing as they met unblinking eyes. The wolf gave nothing but presence, and that was enough. Humans sought therapy in words and routines. Wilderness offered steadiness, uncorrupted by judgment. Each session left a mark deeper than science could measure. Some called him healer, others called him risk. To him, it was no role. He existed. He endured. That endurance seeped into those who sat near him, teaching resilience through silence. The girl guided them, but the wolf anchored them. Not as symbol, not as miracle, but as predator who chose not to strike. And in that choice, humans found something more powerful than comfort. They found proof that survival itself could be shared. On a trail camera meant to record deer, another shape appeared. Grainy, blurred, yet undeniable. A human figure standing just beyond the cabin's reach. Not intruder from that night, but another. Watching, measuring, waiting. The image showed no face, only silhouette against frost. Yet in its stillness, intent bled through. Wolves know when they are watched. The black wolf raised his head at the tree line, ears pricked, body stiffening, as if memory of camera's frame lingered. The cabin was no longer a single confrontation resolved. It was ongoing siege, its defenders known, its borders tested. What men plotted in shadows mattered less than this. The wolf had already marked them. Whether one or many, whether soon or later, they would come again. And when they did, the cabin would not stand alone. The black wolf's range had widened. He was waiting.
Humans built cameras, radios, and protocols, check-ins, safe calls, networks of allies. The girl trained commands, whispered words that could guide but never control. Walt reactivated old contacts, soldiers who still remembered his voice. But beneath it all, preparation meant something simpler, the wolf. His instincts had been honed by seasons that outlasted wars and governments. His readiness was not checklist, but nature. Each evening, he paced boundaries, ears tuned to whispers of wind, nose cataloging every shift in air. The humans armed themselves with tools, the wolf armed himself with certainty. Together they formed a fragile pact, technology and wilderness, law and instinct. Yet at the core stood black fur and blue fire eyes, a promise written not in ink, but in muscle and silence. Preparation was not choice. It was continuation of the only law that never bends. Sunset bled across the mountains, painting pines in copper and crimson. The cabin glowed with restoration, scars patched but not erased. In the yard, the wolf stood silent, breath steaming against cooling air. His eyes caught the dying light, blue tempered into molten gold. Beyond the fence, deeper in the trees, another shape lingered. A true wild wolf, kin of blood, if not bond. It watched, silent, then melted back into the forest. The black wolf did not follow. His place was here, between wilderness and hearth, anchor to both worlds. Far off, an unmarked vehicle rolled past, slowing just enough to notice, then disappearing down gravel roads. Quiet returned, but it carried weight. Survival had been won, not gifted. And in the stillness, one truth reigned. As long as the black wolf remained, this den was not unguarded.